Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series on the life and teachings of the Ba'al Shem Tov. 2 weeks ago, last week, believe it or not, was Tisha B'Av on Tuesday, and we had a Tisha B'Av session. So 2 weeks ago, we began learning from the text called Amud Hatefillah, the pillar of prayer, which records many, I'd say even most, of the Ba'al Shem Tov's teachings about prayer. So as just a quick review, we began with a very, very well-known teaching from the Ba'al Shem Tov based on the construction of Noah's Ark, where it said, Sohar ta'aseh teva ve'el ama techalena milamala. Make a window in the ark and finish it up to 1 amma from the top. And we learned, it's just a quick review, the Ba'al Shem Tov, based on the fact that the word teva, an ark, also means a word. And sohar, the word for window, means to shine, to illuminate. So the Ba'al Shem Tov said that when we say words of Torah and Tefillah, you have to make them shine. And when you do so, you should direct your thoughts and your words to the Shekhinah. So he read the word instead of an amma. Amma is a measurement. But he read it to ima, to the higher mother figure, which is the Shekhinah. That we should direct all of our prayers and our intentions to the Shekhinah. And then at the end of the sentence, as part of the instructions, it was you should build a bottom floor, a middle floor, and an upper floor. And we learned that the Ba'al Shem Tov explained that these 3 floors represent 3 different levels of understanding reality, the world, and each and every letter in the Torah. The bottom floor is what's called worlds, olamot, the way that a letter or a word will manifest in the physical material world. Every letter, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, has an actual manifestation, a impression on the physical world. The middle floor is neshamot, souls. Every letter has an effect on the soul, is connected to the soul. And the top floor is called elokut, divinity, that each letter is a vehicle, is a channel in God's, call it hands, in which he brings his infinite light into a finite world. That was a quick review of the way that Amud Hatefillah begins, with this really awesome idea. And we learned that this could be accomplished. Well, how do you make your words shine? How do you direct them to the Shekhinah? How do you understand every letter, every word, every verse as having an application in worlds, souls, and divinity? We learned that really on 2 levels we can understand this. One is a very, very Kabbalistic way, through understanding deep intentions, which are called yichudim, unifications, of understanding how every letter, every word, every verse is connected to the sfirot, is connected to levels of the soul, is connected to different names of God, and through a very complicated series of intentions, it makes the prayers come alive on many different dimensions. At the same time, we learned that this is not for everyone. This takes years, a lifetime of practice and study. And on the other hand, it could be done just by concentrating on the simple, literal meaning of the words. And instead of just reading them, that as we read them, we visualize them coming to life. That's what it means to make your words shine, to bring life force into what you're saying. So instead of just reciting the prayers or reciting the Psalms, they, without knowing any Kabbalistic intentions whatsoever, of just concentrating on what the words actually mean and to feel them and to visualize them, that is what makes the words shine. And so it can be on any of those levels, from the highest Kabbalistic level to the most literal level. We can apply the Ba'al Shem Tov's teachings. That was a quick review. Now we are going to continue. I think I mentioned already, there's a certain amount of repetition in Amud Hatefillah because different people, either the direct students of the Ba'al Shem Tov or those that learned from the students of the Ba'al Shem Tov, recorded his teachings. So sometimes, like for example, on the teaching I just gave over, there is a number of different students give it over in the way that they received it or the way that they heard it. Okay, good. I'm trying to concentrate on letting people in into the class at the same time. So now we're going to start with some other ideas. So I'm not reading every single one. I've picked out the ones that I think are most appropriate for all of us. This next one is super relevant, super relevant. It says like this: Rabbi Yisrael Ba'al Shem Tov Amar. Remember, I'm going to read these in Hebrew and then free translation. Adam shehu koreh b'Torah, a person who is reading the Torah. What I understand here is someone individually, not who's reading it for the whole congregation, because it wouldn't work so well in their case. So here it's talking about a person is reading in the Torah. And he feels, he sees the light, this illumination in every letter of the Torah, every word of the Torah, meaning he's excited to be learning the Torah. Even though he doesn't understand the way to chant the Torah, since he is reading with great love, ava gedolah, with great love, umit lahavut, in great excitement and inspiration, ein Hashem yiparach midakdek imo, af she'ein omrim karui, that God is not so exacting with this person, even though he's not reading it correctly. He might have the tamim wrong. He might even have the vowels wrong. But he's doing his best. So the Ba'al Shem Tov says God is not so exacting because this person is like so excited to learn Torah. Mashal. So the Ba'al Shem gave over a parable. The tinok she'aviv oavo ma'od, to a father who loves his child very, very much. Mavakesh devar me'aviv, and the child asks something from his father. Afapi shehu megamgam ve'eno omer karui, even though the child, imagine a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, who's just learning to talk and wants something. And so in their like broken communication, they are like falling over their words, trying to explain what they need. And they don't say it correctly. Aviv nitna nehena, but the father gets so much pleasure. Oh my gosh, my child's learning to talk and he can even express what he wants. Wow. Wow. And the father is not so careful, like he could say, well, you didn't ask for it correctly, so I'm not giving it to you. No father would do that. So even though the child is just kind of falling over their words, the father is going to make sure that their child gets what the child wants. So that's his teaching. That's his teaching. That's so important for each and every one of us. I remember we talked last week even about the idea that many people just don't know the Hebrew and they have to say it in English. And the question is that okay? Is that good enough? Is it better to do it in Hebrew and not understand what you're talking about? Or is it better in your mother language, but full of intent because you know what you're saying? But here we see the Ba'al Shem Tov is just saying, it's just a beautiful idea. The parable is beautiful. Is if a person wants to learn Torah and is putting their time and energy into it, then God gets great pleasure, even if we're falling over the words, we're not pronouncing them correctly. And of course, with prayer also. Obviously, this goes with prayer because that's the parable is asking for our needs. So in the Shemona Esrei, we're asking for our needs. So this is just a good thing to remember. Good thing to remember is like as long as a person is doing their best, then that is what is important. So it's a simple teaching, but you can imagine back then, as we've talked about, there were almost like two classes of Jews. There were your scholarly elite and almost everyone else. So you can imagine if someone was not pronouncing the words right and we're getting half the words wrong, that someone who is in the scholarly elite might look down on them, might even, God forbid, laugh at them or think like, what a bumbling idiot. But the Ba'al Shem came to say, no one should think like that. God doesn't think like that. If a person is doing their best to connect to Torah and prayer, then in God's eyes, he gets tremendous pleasure from that. So that's just it's such a simple but beautiful Torah. Okay, the next idea from the Ba'al Shem Tov. Kol ma shero'eh yizkor b'kadosh baruch hu. Everything that a person sees, it should remind them. They should remember God. Im ahava yizkor ahavat Hashem yitbarach. If it's something positive, has to do with love, then one should attach that love, whether I love my ice cream, or I love to do this activity, or I love this person, they should always include the love of God along with that. Ve'im yira yiskor yirat Hashem yitbarach. But if, let's say, it's something that has to do with gevura or yira, or dealing with judgments or more negative types of situations. Also, connect that to God's, to have yira of God, to have a connection to the gevura of God. וכידוע בכמה מקומות, ואפילו כשהולך לבית הכיסא, יחשוב הלא אני מפריד רע מטוב, והטוב ישר לעבודתו יתברך שמו. וזה ייחודים. Now this is an astounding statement by the Ba'al Shem Tov. So he says, even in kinds of situations that we might think, why would we be thinking about Hashem? And he mentions going to the bathroom. Well, we know that when we get out of the bathroom, we actually say a blessing. And it happens to be a beautiful blessing, mentioning God's throne of glory and saying that if one of our orifices would be open and it should be closed, or if it was closed and it should be open, we couldn't exist for even 1 hour. And then we bless God. So the Ba'al Shem Tov says, even in the bathroom, we should connect it to this idea, well, I'm getting rid of my waste material, and what is left I can use to serve God. And then he ends, though, the last 2 words are astounding. He says, V'zehu yichudim. This, again, the concept of yichudim means unifications. This word became, call it famous, well-known, because the Arizal left us hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of what are called unifications with different verses. There are certain prayer books that are very thick because every one of the prayers has an associated unification. What are these unifications? Again, which verse or which word is connected to which sphera, to which world, to which name of God, to which vowels go with the name of God, which permutation of the name of God. These are all complicated unifications. But here he says, even in a case where you would go to the bathroom and you come out and you say a blessing, and all you're doing is you're not doing fancy Kabbalistic yichudim. You're just simply thanking God that the way you made our bodies, God, is amazing. It's amazing. And I'm so thankful that I can even go to the bathroom. If I couldn't go to the bathroom, my body would fill with waste material and a person couldn't live. So he says, V'zehu yichudim. And what is the unification? Here is simply connecting our thoughts to God. So this is what we said at the beginning of the class, this idea of making the words of Torah and Tefillah shine can be accomplished from a very, very high inner dimension, somewhat complicated series of Kabbalistic unifications, or the simple appreciation for the body that God made us. That's also a yichud. So it should be very encouraging to all of us. We can all do yichudim. You don't have to be a Kabbalist to do unifications. But it's such a fundamental idea. In other words, the Ba'al Shem Tov was the epitome of inclusiveness. He himself knew all of these yichudim. And if you remember, 2 weeks ago, we shared a story where he himself learned that there was this, what we'll call it, the more simple way to do yichudim. And so he had the full range. He had the full range, but not everyone has the full range. But he wanted to be as inclusive as possible. And so therefore, it doesn't matter what level you're on, you can be involved in unifying your soul, your body, your consciousness with Hashem. That is what a unification is. Okay, the next idea. Also very relevant, very important. Shemati Memori Zal. So this is one of the students who's giving over that. I heard this from my Rebbe, the Ba'al Shem Tov. That before we pray, we have to strengthen ourselves. Why? Imagine the scene. You wake up in the morning, you're somewhat tired, you have a work day in front of you, you have a certain amount of time, let's say, to get to shul and daven, or daven at home, whatever it is. And we go right into it because we just don't have much more time. Our head really isn't into it. We feel strongly the obligation to pray, and that's an incredibly important thing in of itself. The Ba'al Shem Tov is going to address that. But here, he's saying that ideally, before we pray, a person needs to strengthen themselves in order to pray properly. He says, so that we won't have all kinds of extraneous thoughts. In other words, we have to put our head into the prayers, even though I have to go to work, I have to do this errand, I have to do this, but I have to strengthen myself to put that, when I'm done with davening, I'll deal with all of this. Right now, I want to connect to God through my prayers. That's the point of it all. So if we're thinking about all these other things, we fulfill our obligation to pray, but it's not much of a spiritual, healthy experience. So he continues. So a person has to prepare themselves and strengthen themselves before they pray. Either through, we'll call it a meditation. It could be a 1-minute meditation that I'm putting my head in the place of davening and connecting to God. He has to arouse his intellect in order to properly connect to the prayers. We all know we can say the prayers without really connecting to them. Unfortunately, this is very a current reality for a lot of people. So that's why the Ba'al Shem is saying, it might take you a minute, it might take you 5 minutes, but strengthen yourself before you start praying. In other words, pray to God. God, give me strength to pray to you correctly. Okay, he continues. Mazmirim o Torah kodem tefillah lo yalo mochin letefillah. So now, here he's saying someone might do, we'll call it pre-davening, reading the Psalms or learning Torah. But the Ba'al Shem says, but you have to be careful not to expend too much energy preparing to daven, and then when you get to the davening, you're worn out already. Now, this is an important thing because let's say in Chabad, there is a tradition, and it's a wonderful tradition, to learn before you daven, in order to get your head into what he calls mochin, into like an intellectual headspace where you're involved with Torah. And then you're going to go into the prayers with that kind of preparation. So the Ba'al Shem is saying, that's great. Just make sure you don't overdo it. Let's say you end up learning for an hour or an hour and a half, which is great. But then when you get to the prayers, it's like, oh, I didn't realize I spent so much time learning. I better cut the prayer short because I have to get going. So he's just kind of warning us to be very, very balanced. And then he quotes from, it's actually from the Gemara in Menachot. He says, "V'zeu she'amru," this is what they meant when the sages said, "Echad lemarbeh v'echad lemahamit, ubilvad sheyikaven libo l'shem shemayim." So they said, it doesn't matter if you do a lot or if you do a little, as long as you direct your intent to for the sake of heaven. So that's what the Ba'al Shem says. You need a minute to prepare to daven properly. Take a minute. Some people need a half an hour. There were stories of Rebbes and their students where they would take hours to prepare to daven. They would daven late, but they knew themselves, and they knew if they just go right into the davening, their head isn't into it. So they would do whatever they had to do for how long they had to do it until they could honestly say to themselves, okay, now I can daven properly. So there were some, I mean, even to this day, there are some minions that, I'm not talking about just on Shabbos, that start at 10 or even 11 in the morning. For some people, that's outrageous. But for some people, it's like, that's what it takes for me to get my head into a place that I can properly daven. So the Ba'al Shem is kind of giving advice on many different parameters here. And then he just brings an example. He says, it's the same on Yom Kippur. He says, before Ne'ilah, let's say the last prayer of Yom Kippur is really important. And it's really important to put your whole being into it. So he just says that be careful the time before Ne'ilah, not to expend yourself too much on reading more Tehillim. I mean, there's some shuls that there's no break whatsoever. They literally are in shul all day long and not even saying extra things, just getting through the prayers, because they're very extended. So here, though, he's alluding to, let's say someone has a bit of time before Ne'ilah. So he says, kind of relax a bit. So when it gets to Ne'ilah, you can put your whole heart and soul into it. So again, here you feel the inclusiveness of what the Ba'al Shem is trying to teach. He's like, these teachings can be understood on many different levels, and different people will fulfill what the Ba'al Shem is saying, but on how they understand it on a personal level. Okay, the next Torah. This is an amazing one. And there are many Hasidic stories that are based on this teaching here. Listen what the Ba'al Shem Tov says. He says, Zeh sod gadol. There's a great secret here. Shehashem Yiparach. This is a great secret from God. Me Hashem Yiparach she'adam chai achar tefillah. That a person is still alive after they pray. Shalafi derech hateva. Now, you have to understand, the Ba'al Shem Tov is talking from his level. And that's why, again, I'm going to emphasize that many of these Torahs are directed to people on a very, very high level of spirituality. And other ones are directed to people on the simplest level. But this one obviously is for people like the Ba'al Shem Tov, who would daven like the Ba'al Shem Tov. So he says it's a great secret from God that a person is alive after they pray, because according to the rules of nature, Hayal lo lamut, a person could actually die. Machmat shemafsik kocho. He puts so much energy into it, he'll have no energy left to live. A person doesn't hold back. They put their entire being into their prayers. Kinatan kocho b'tefillah. Put their whole strength. Kolkach mikoach hakavana gedola shehu mikaven. On the great intent that they have and putting their entire being in it, according to nature, they should have no life force left in them. They've like, it's like an offering. They've given their whole being to God. He says that's a great mystery that we could even live after davening. And there's many stories that go along with this. One, maybe someday I'll tell you. It's a very long story, but it has to do with this. But there were Rebbes that would say goodbye to their wife and children before they would go to daven in the morning, because they didn't know if they would still be alive at the end. And we take this at face value. We're talking about people, and it still happens. There are still minions in Israel where they daven for hours and hours every morning. Hours and hours. There are certain minyanim where they yell the davening at their full voice. It still happens. But in the beginning of the Hasidic movement, it was like very pronounced how people would put their whole being into their davening. So, I mean, we could just imagine this is like the story of Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu take their offering into the Holy of Holies. And all as it says is that God took their souls. But obviously, from their point of view, they were pouring out their whole heart and soul. And I'm sure we discussed at one point, it's not even clear that they wanted to come back, that their intent was to come back, that they actually wanted to give their souls over to God. So here we can imagine. And then when you read the stories of how the Ba'al Shem davened, one of the stories given over is that when the Ba'al Shem Tov davened, his whole body shook. his whole body shook. And of course, people who are with them, they go into a state of awe watching him daven, which of course inspired them. But it's said that if there was a cup of water, let's say on a table at the back of the shul, the water in the cup would be shaking from the vibrations that the Ba'al Shem Tov was giving over. How much more so the people who were davening with them, how they felt these vibrations. So this is an amazing Torah, and he's saying this quite seriously. He's saying this quite seriously. There is a story, I'm just reminded of Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhinsk. He was a student of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the student of the Ba'al Shem Tov. And it's given over that when he would daven Kabbalah Shabbat, there was like some kind of a clock in the Beit Midrash, and he was constantly looking at the time. And his students didn't understand this because their davening was very ecstatic. It was this kind of like give it your all kind of davening. And the Rebbe was like that also. But he was constantly looking at what time it was. So his students asked him, Rebbe, what's with you and the clock? So he said, when we daven Kabbalah Shabbat, it is so high and elevated, sometimes it feels that my soul is going to leave my body. So I'm always looking at the clock to keep my soul in this world, to keep me rooted in a physical reality, because if not, I'm afraid my soul would just leave. So again, you can imagine the level of the people we're talking about here. Okay, let's do another one. Here's a very interesting one, very, very interesting one. It applies to all of us. The Ba'al Shem Tov says, Kish'adam b'madriga ketana. A person is not on the highest spiritual level. He's wherever he is. Otov yuter. Oh, let's say he's on a higher level, but not like way up there. Yoter Yoterli palel metocha sidur. For this type of person, it's better that they daven with the prayer book open and they're looking at it and they're reading the prayers. Kishemikoach shero'eh ha'otiyot mitpalel yoter b'kavana. Because just looking at the Hebrew letters gives a person more kavana, because now here we're talking about a person who knows the prayers by heart, so they could pray without a sitter prayer book or with. So he's saying, but if a person isn't on like such a high level, it's better to pray by looking at the words, because that is very inspirational. And I can share is that I used to have this, but for many years I didn't have a Siddur where all the letters are written in what's called Ketav Ashurit. They're written in the way that they appear in a Sefer Torah. And so just recently, my son gave me a Siddur, which has many of these Yehudim. And it's written in Ketav Ashurit. And I forgot how wonderful it is to look at the words, the way they're written in the Torah. It's very inspirational. It's hard to put it in words, but it's such a pleasure. So that's what the Ba'al Shem Tov is saying. Just looking at the letters, even though you maybe you know the davening by heart, but if you're on a certain level, it's better to look in the siddur, and the letters will give you inspiration. Aval keshehu davuk ba'olam ha'elyon. But if someone in their prayers is attached to the higher worlds, again, they know the davening by heart. If you don't know the davening by heart, you have to look in a siddur. You need to look in a siddur. But let's say you know it by heart, and your consciousness is the prayers are bringing you to a very high level. He says, "Az yoter tov lizgor einav." It's better to close your eyes and just go with that energy. Kedei shelo yivatel oto hari'ah miliyot davuk ba'olam elyon. Because when a person reaches that kind of consciousness, looking in the siddur would actually, in a sense, it would make them lose connection with the higher worlds where their consciousness is. That's the whole Torah. So this is very relevant to everyone, because a lot of people have this question. But again, it's really only appropriate if you know the words by heart. If not, then you need to look in a siddur. Now, even you have to know though, let's say you're praying, and you're praying from a siddur. But if you have the time, you have the opportunity at any minute to close your eyes and to visualize what you're praying about. What do the words mean? You can meditate in between each of the prayers. And so, in other words, it's not either or. There might be parts of the prayer where it's better to pray with the siddur. There might be times where it's better not, but it's not either or. It depends on the situation. Like, for example, when we daven the Amidah, so we're, according to Kabbalah, we're in Olam HaAtzilut. We're like way up there. But let's say you're davening from a siddur, but we're told that when we get to the end of all of the requests, the last of the requests is Baruch Atah Hashem Shomea Tefillah. Blessed are you, God, who hears prayer. So we're told that it's very appropriate at that point to put in your individual requests above anything that you davened up to there. And so a lot of the time, people just naturally, it's just instinct. We close our eyes. Even if we've been saying the prayers within in the prayer book, we close our eyes because we want to get to a deeper place. There's this idea, like when we not only close our eyes, but we cover our eyes when we say the Shema, a double hiding, a double hiddenness. And Reb Shlomo used to teach, sometimes when you want to see something very clearly, you have to close your eyes. Because the world can be very illusory. We don't always, the sages called it olam deshikra, a world of illusion, of lies. So sometimes if you want to get to the truth, you have to close your eyes. So sometimes in the davening, even if you're praying from a siddur, there are times that it's appropriate to close your eyes and let your heart, your soul, your mind go to whatever place it needs to go that minute, then you can always go back to the siddur. And like I said, it's not an either or. There's certain parts that people naturally maybe it's more natural to do it by heart. Other times it's more natural to do it with a siddur. Okay, so we're going to end here. So we'll have time for discussion as well. Everyone should be blessed to be able to take these teachings from the Ba'al Shem Tov and apply it in the way that it works for you. And that's why I'm emphasizing again that so many of these Torahs are very all-inclusive. The Ba'al Shem is trying to everyone can find their place in the ladder of prayer. May it be so that we also find our place in the ladder of prayer.